Picture this. A man named David retires to Thailand at 67, full UK state pension, decades of work behind him. Everything paid and exactly as it should be. At first it feels like he's done the right thing. Warm evenings, cheap food, a lifestyle that suddenly feels achievable in a way it never did back in the UK. And for the first time in years, money stops feeling like pressure. But here's what he doesn't realise at the time. While he's living that life in Thailand, something very different is happening to the other UK retirees in completely different countries. People with exactly the same pension, same contributions, same starting point, are getting something he isn't. Every year, like clockwork, an increase, not huge at first, but noticeable, but consistent, and that difference doesn't show itself immediately. In fact, for the first few years, it barely matters at all. But over time, it stops being small and starts becoming something that can quietly add up to over £160,000 across a retirement. Not because anything changed suddenly, but because two identical pensions started behaving in completely different ways. And almost no one sees it coming until it's already in motion. So the question is simple. How can two people who paid into the same UK system end up with completely different retirements just because of where they decide to live? And more importantly, is this something that could actually change what retirement in Thailand looks like over time? Let's break it down properly. Now you might be watching this thinking, this sounds interesting, but I'm not retired yet. I've still got time. Or maybe you're already closer to retirement and you've been looking at places like Thailand for years. Chiang Mai, Hua Hin, Pattaya, maybe even Phuket. You've probably done the same research most people do. Cost of living, visa rules, healthcare, maybe a few videos, a few blogs, comparing rent prices in the UK. And on paper it all makes sense. Lower costs, better weather, a slower pace of life, a retirement that finally feels like living, not just getting by. That's why Thailand ends up on so many shortlists in your late 50s, early 60s. But here's where something quietly shifts, because almost no one factors in one rule from the UK pension system. And it's not something you see in holiday research, or travel videos, or even most retirement planning conversations. It just doesn't come up. And yet it changes something fundamental. How your income behaves for the rest of your life. Not in year one, not even in year two, but over the long term. Now before we get into the technical side of it, let's go back to David for a moment. Because his story isn't unusual. In fact, it's far more common than most people realise. He didn't misunderstand the pension system. He didn't ignore the rules. He didn't do anything wrong. He did what thousands of people do every year. He chose where to live, without fully understanding how the UK pension system behaves depending on where you live. And that's the key point here. Not how much pension you get, but where it's paid. Because that one detail decides whether your income quietly grows every year or stays locked at the same number indefinitely. And the difficult part is this. You don't really feel the difference at first. Not in the early years. Not when everything is new. Not when life in Thailand still feels like a major upgrade. But later, much later, it starts to show itself. And by the time most people notice it, it's no longer something you can easily adjust. So let's slow this right down and actually look at what's really happening. Because once you see it clearly, it's very hard to ignore. Let's keep this simple. Your UK state pension is designed to rise every year under the triple lock: inflation, wage growth, or 2.5%. So in the UK, your income is protected. But that system doesn't apply everywhere. It depends where you live. In some countries abroad, the pension still rises exactly as normal. In others, like Thailand, it doesn't. It becomes frozen. No increases, no inflation adjustment, no catch-up. Whatever you receive on your first claim it abroad is what you stay on for life. At first, most people don't see the issue because retirement thinking is short-term, month to month, not decades. So the reaction is usually, Thailand is cheaper anyway, I'll be fine. And in the early years, they usually are. But over time, something happens. One pension rises, the other doesn't. And the gap slowly opens. Not suddenly, but permanently. So why does this happen? It comes down to whether the UK has an agreement with the country you retire to that allows pension increases to continue. Some countries have it, some don't. That's why two people with identical work histories can end up on completely different long-term outcomes just based on where they live. At first, everything looks identical. Same pension, same lifestyle, same comfort. But over time, only one pension keeps rising, and the gap slowly appears. Most people only realize this after they've already made the decision, not before it. Now let's turn this into something real, because up to this point, this has been about rules and systems. But what actually matters is what it does to your money over time. So let's strip this right back. Imagine two retirees, same job history, same national insurance record, same UK state pension starting point, let's say around £11,500 a year. One stays in the UK or lives in a country where the pension increases every year. The other moves to Thailand, where the pension is frozen from day one. Now here's what most people get wrong. In year one, there is almost no difference. In year two, still basically nothing noticeable. Even by year 3 or 4, it doesn't feel significant in real life, because the numbers are still close. But something is happening underneath that most people don't see. One pension is quietly rising every year, the other is not. So the gap doesn't appear suddenly. It opens, slowly at first, then wider every year after that. Now fast forward 10 years. At this point, the retiree with the uprated pension is clearly ahead. Their income has been lifted multiple times. The retiree in Thailand is still standing on exactly the same starting figure. No increase, no adjustment, no catch-up. Now extend that to 15 years, then 20 years. And this is where it stops being a small gap and becomes a structural difference in lifestyle. Because when you add up all the missing years increasing over time, you're not just comparing two monthly incomes anymore. You're comparing two completely different lifetime income curves. And depending on inflation and wage growth over the decades, the difference can realistically build to 60,000, 100,000, and in some scenarios £160,000 or more in total lost uplift. Not as a single loss, not as a sudden drop, but as income you simply never receive, year after year, because your pension stopped moving. And that's the part most people miss, because no one feels this happening in real time. You don't get a letter saying you lost £500 this year. You just see your pension arrive and assume everything is fine. But compared to someone with uprating, you are genuinely being left behind, not dramatically, but consistently. And here's the key point. This isn't about Thailand being expensive. It's not about whether you can survive on the income. It's about the direction of travel. One income rises with time, the other doesn't. And over a long retirement, that difference compounds into something far bigger than most people ever planned for. Now at this point, most viewers think the obvious question. Okay, but Thailand is cheaper, so maybe it balances out anyway. And that's exactly what we need to look at next, because that's where the story gets more interesting. Now at this point you might be thinking, okay, this sounds like a pretty big downside, and you'd be right to question it, because so far we've focused heavily on the frozen pension side of things, and the long-term financial gap it can create. But here's what's important to understand. Despite all of that, people are still moving to Thailand in large numbers for retirement, fully aware of the pension rules, fully aware of the risks, and still choosing to go anyway. So the obvious question is, why? Why would someone accept a system where their income doesn't increase over time and still feel like it's the right decision? Well, it comes down to something that doesn't always show up clearly in financial spreadsheets: quality of life. Because when people actually arrive in Thailand and live there, not just visit, the experience is very different to what most financial discussions can capture. In the UK, retirement often comes with a slow increase in cost pressures: heating bills in the winter, council tax, food prices, transport, insurance. And over time, many retirees find that even though their pension might be rising, their lifestyle doesn't necessarily feel like it's improving. In Thailand, the starting point is different. Everyday costs are lower, significantly lower in many cases. Housing can be a fraction of UK prices. Food is affordable in a way that changes daily behaviour. Eating out becomes normal, not occasional. Transport is simple. The weather removes entire categories of cost: heating, winter clothes, seasonal expenses. And for many retirees, that creates something important: space, financial breathing room. Not necessarily wealth, but freedom from constant pressure. "I'm not constantly watching every pound anymore," one retiree described it. "That alone changes how I feel every day." And that psychological shift is something that doesn't show up in pension calculations. Now there's another layer to this as well, because while the UK pension might be frozen, your overall cost of living in Thailand is still often low enough that the pension stretches further than it would in the UK, at least in the early years. And that's the key reason so many people accept the trade-off. They're not choosing Thailand because the pension system is perfect. They're choosing it because the overall lifestyle equation still works in their favour, even with the long-term limitations. But this balance isn't static. It changes over time, which is why people tend to approach it in different ways. Some stay fully in Thailand and accept the frozen pension as part of the lifestyle equation. Some split their time between Thailand and the UK to stay more flexible. And others build Thailand into a phased retirement, part-time in the early years, then reassessing later as health and finances change. There's no single right answer, but there are very different financial outcomes depending on which path you take. And most problems only happen when people don't consciously choose one at all. Now there's something most retirement conversations don't spend enough time on, because it's easy to focus on the early years of retirement, the freedom at 65, the travel at 67, the lifestyle at 70. But retirement doesn't stay in that phase. It changes. And when you're living abroad, that change matters more than people expect. In your 60s, Thailand usually feels very easy. You're active, mobile, healthy. Everything feels simple and enjoyable. But over time, things naturally shift. Healthcare becomes more of a factor, more checkups, more medication, more appointments. And the reality in Thailand is different from the UK here. Because in the UK, the NHS acts as a safety net. In Thailand, healthcare is excellent, but it's private and paid for either directly or through insurance. And that's where things slowly change with age. Insurance tends to get more expensive after 65. By 70, options can tighten. By mid-70s, costs and exclusions can increase again. None of this is a reason not to retire here, but it does become more relevant later in life, because you start to see two things moving in opposite directions. A pension that may not increase and costs that often do. And over time, that creates pressure. Not early on, not in the first years, but later. As one retiree put it, I was fine in my late 60s. It was around 73 that I started thinking differently. And that's something you'll hear quite often. No regret, just a shift in priorities. Because aging changes what matters. Being close to a hospital, having support nearby, feeling stable. And what feels like the perfect lifestyle at 65 can feel very different at 75. Not worse, just different. And that's why this conversation matters. Because retirement isn't just about where you live. It's about how your life changes over time. Now let's bring this back to something practical, because this doesn't affect everyone in the same way. If your retirement is mostly the UK state pension, then this matters a lot more, because that income is doing all the work. And if it doesn't rise, your whole position slowly becomes more sensitive over time. If you already have private pensions or savings, the pressure is reduced because you got flexibility. And for people with significant assets or rental income, this issue becomes far less important in the overall picture. The key point is this: two people can live in exactly the same place in Thailand and have completely different retirement outcomes. Not because of Thailand, but because of their income structure. So let's bring everything together. Retiring in Thailand can be an incredible decision. Lower costs, better weather, a completely different pace of life. But there are structural realities that don't appear just because life feels cheaper at the start. The UK state pension in certain countries does not increase over time, and over long periods that difference quietly becomes significant. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but consistently. And when combined with inflation, currency movement, healthcare costs and aging, retirement becomes less about where you live and more about how your income behaves over time. The people who do best in Thailand aren't the ones with perfect pensions. They're the ones who understood the trade-offs before they moved. If you want help thinking through your own situation, or you're trying to work out whether Thailand actually fits your numbers, I do one-on-one consultations. You'll find the link in the description under the extras section, or you can support the channel directly through Buy Me a Coffee if you find these videos useful. And feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments below, because everyone sees this differently, and that's what makes it so interesting. Thanks for listening today. I'll see you on the next one, guys.